What the heck is a novella anyway? Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Whitney. I want to include 10 novellas in no particular order that I would recommend you check out if you want to read some sci-fi novellas. The official definition is it has to be a work that is between 17,000 and 40,000 words. Unofficially, that means that the author doesn't have a whole lot of time to get into the intricacies of world building. We don't have time for a lot of the subtle interactions between side characters or the subplots that you may really love about novels, especially sci-fi. We also aren't going to have a whole lot of time to talk about a lot of scientific concepts. Most novellas only have just enough time to establish the world and get you a single idea or a single event and its climax. That's it. If that sounds good to you, then you should check out some of these novellas. The first novellas that I want to talk about are probably one of the most famous I'm going to talk about on this series, and that is, of course, the Murderbot novella series. The Murderbot novella series is by Martha Wells, and it consists of 5 novellas, and then it culminates or finishes in one single novel. Now, this is one of the most awarded novella series of all time. There's a lot of people talking about it. It's won a lot of the Hugos. It's won a lot of the Nebula Awards. I know it won the Hugo Awards of 2021 for Best Series. So I think there's going to be a lot of people out there who really enjoyed this series. This series takes place following an AI who calls themselves Murderbots. And they do that because their main function is to track and protect a human client from any other danger or problem, which usually involves murdering something, right? So luckily, if you're not really into a whole lot of violence, don't worry, this series isn't either. Most of what happens in the Murderbot series takes place in the charging station or on a spaceship or in a big adventure that Murderbot goes on. The cool thing about this series is that it applies a lot of human characteristics to this AI, including things like social anxiety and also coping mechanisms that Murderbot employs to handle all of the social situations that it's required to be in. Is it goes back to its charging station and binges human soap operas. That's right, human soap operas. Each novella installment is really like a chapter in the series of Murderbot. Full disclosure here, I haven't finished the last 2 installments in the series. So that means I'm on novella number 4 and I haven't finished the 5th or the last book. So I can't tell you about how the ending is, but it seems to be a very well-loved series. So go check it out. The second novella series that I want to recommend that is also very popular is the Binti series. This is a trilogy that has come to a lot of people's attention because it is written by an author whose name I cannot say. I'll include it here on the screen for you. Binti is a fun sci-fi African futuristic novel that takes place on a spaceship. There is a main character who has lived in an African tribe for her entire life and decides to turn her back on her culture and go to a university training on another planet. It's a very prestigious studying award, and she decides to go, and on her way there, her ship gets attacked by aliens. And I won't want to spoil any of this, so I'm just gonna leave that there. These aliens are really intriguing. It's very different, and there's a lot of African culture included in these novellas. I really thought that this series was a fun adventure. I also thought that this series could be something that would appeal to a lot of young adults. So if you're interested in looking for something that would be, easier to comprehend and maybe a good introduction for young adults, consider the Binti series. Number 3 is going to be the book Beggars in Spain by Nancy Kress. This book is definitely very much a novella of one awesome idea. It was so awesome, in fact, that after she published it in 2004, she decided to make 2 more novellas in the same concept and the same universe because it was such a cool idea. What if in the future, humans not only genetically manipulate their babies, but they have an option for what genetic information they want to change. And in the universe of Beggars in Spain, it becomes available to the populace to genetically alter your child to not require sleep any longer. And as these children grow older and enter the workforce, you can imagine that now they have this amazing advantage that other people who didn't have the time or the money or the requirement to do this to their children now are suddenly disadvantaged. This changes the world economy. It changes everything about how we see our workforce and what kind of effects that this would have on our world today, or I guess our world in the future. This was such a cool idea. Obviously, she didn't explore it to its full and complete depth because she wrote 3 more. But if this sounds like something that you would be interested in, there's not a whole lot of action. There's just a lot of discussion around what it would do to the world economy. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, check out Beggars in Spain. Nancy Kress has quite a few other novellas if that's something you're interested in. Also a standalone. It's called The Tea Master and the Detective. This one is by, I think I'm going to say this wrong, Aliette Baudard, I think.
Aliette de Baudard.
The Tea Master and the Detective takes place in space, and again the main character is actually a ship AI who teams up with a human detective, gets kind of sucked into the murder case that the detective is working on. This is just a fun series. A lot of people talk about how it's like Sherlock Holmes and Watson in the future, although I would say that that doesn't do it very much justice, and I would not go in with that expectation. But this was just a fun, feel-good, single adventure that would be a fun space detective novel if you want to check that out. So the next 3 novellas that I picked up are novellas that I picked up exclusively to check out the author. The first of that was one that was recently published in 2021 by 2 different authors, a collaboration between Gareth Powell and Peter Hamilton. Both of these are very established sci-fi authors that typically write huge series and big tomes of novels that are really very intimidating to get into. So I wanted to be able to have a taste of these authors without actually having to commit to a huge series. And that is why I got into Lightchaser. Lightchaser is a standalone. There is no sequel to it. You can just pick it up and read it. And it is kind of a romance mystery novel. It follows a woman who is traveling interplanetary throughout the galaxy, and her job is to pick up these memory chips that are being left in each planet, in each human civilization, and they record the lives of the wearer, both the thoughts, the emotions, the feelings, and the visual input. It doesn't really go into explanation as to why, but as she's traveling interplanetary, obviously time is dilating, and so time is going much slower for her than it is for everyone else. So she has the chance to sample some of these lives and starts seeing some really interesting patterns, particularly somebody who continues to deliver a message to these memory wearers that don't make sense to the memory wearer, that don't have any implication on their lives, and yet they start being a message to her. She has to then follow the clues and try to figure out what's going on. I thought was a really interesting, unique way to sample these 2 authors and what their tastes and what their writing is like. I don't know how accurate it is for their typical writing styles because I haven't read much of either of these 2 authors, but I really wanted to get a feel for it. And I would recommend this novella. It was a fun one. Another novella that I picked up for the author exclusively is my very first experience with Robert A. Heinlein. I know, he's a classic, he's a big 3, but I wasn't sure I was gonna like him. I hear he's very heavy-handed with a lot of his political views, and so I decided to pick up one of his novellas because it was a standalone and it wasn't going to take up a lot of my time. I was also intimidated by him because I thought he was gonna be super complex. So I picked up his novella, Orphans of the Sky. This novella only took 4.5 hours to listen to on Audible, and then of course I immediately went out and bought the novella itself, and so now I own a paper copy. This novella was everything I wanted it to be. This is a satirical novella that is in many ways his allegory of the cave in Aristotle terms. If you haven't read Allegory of the Cave by Aristotle, shame on your high school English teacher, and also go out and read it. I think it's like all of 10 pages, and it's available for free online. It takes place following a boy who grew up on a spaceship who believes that a spaceship is all there is to the entire universe, and he doesn't really know what a spaceship is. And he's encountering a lot of people throughout his life that change his understanding of his universe and his world. And then, of course, he also has to convince others of what he knows. This is definitely very tongue-in-cheek, very over the top, exactly what I was looking for in a sci-fi novella. This was one of my favorites on this list. I would highly recommend that you go check this out, as long as you can understand that it is a satire. The next one on this list is another one I picked up for the author, and that is John Scalzi's God Engines. You guys, I can't understand how people aren't talking about this novella. This is so different than his usual writing. He's well known for his sci-fi satires, and he's well known for being very lighthearted and a little bit funny. But this novella, wow. This novella really does combine fantasy and sci-fi. So there's both magic and space flight in this novella. But what was surprising to me is the serious tone of this novella and the fact that we learn how dark humanity is. He makes a lot of statements and a lot of complexity, a lot of subtlety actually in this novella. Maybe I'm overreading it. I don't know. Definitely go check it out and tell me what you think. This novella packed a heavy punch. We're definitely following a god. That's right. A god that is on a spaceship, and we start to learn that humanity enslaves gods so that way they can travel among the stars. Whoa, heavy concepts. I can't really talk a whole lot more about this because I don't want to spoil it for you, but there's a lot of implications of this as far as statements about humanity, subtleties about how we handle our problems. I just can't talk about this novella enough, but it is deep and heavy. So I think that's a lot different than his usual work, so something to check out. So if you are into fantasy and sci-fi as a combination, especially in a novella, we have to mention my man, Adrian Tchikovsky. He is pretty prolific as far as the novellas go. As a matter of fact, I have several of his novellas here, and all of these novellas are fantasy sci-fi combinations. And I think that's a really cool way to kind of dip your toes into both. So two of these are standalone novellas. The first one is Elder Race. Elder Race is getting quite a lot of attention from BookTube currently because it is one of the novellas up for nomination for a Hugo Award this year. I know that it's one of the ones that I'll be voting for. So Elder Race was a really cool novella, and it can be summarized by a quote by Arthur C. Clarke, actually. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I feel like that is a good summary of what this book is about. It starts with a princess in a castle in a fantasy land who realizes that there is a darkness descending on her land, and while the queen, her mother, is ignoring it, she decides to walk up to the wizard's tower and ask for help, which hasn't been done in generations. I can't really go any further than that without giving you spoilers, but this one was such an easy standalone read. You could easily get through this in a single sitting, a single day. It was just a fun novella. I would really recommend you check that one out. Another one of his standalones was done in one of my wrap-ups, and that is Ogres. This is his most recent novella, and it takes place again in a fantasy land where ogres now sort of enslave or rule humans, and we're discovering throughout the novella why. It's a different reason than you think, and it is a fun twist. This was just a good time. I think that there's at least 2 good twists in this novella. Again, I can't say too much. It's so hard not to tell you much about it because I don't want to spoil it. The last novella is The Expert System's Brother. And this is actually a duology because this idea was so cool that I think he had to come up with a second, like a sequel to it, because it didn't completely finish. It's sort of a sci-fi alien world. It has like this Fern Gully feel where people are living around this tree tree, and the tree is giving them life, and they can't stray too far away from it or else. Again, it is a good combination of fantasy and sci-fi. I can't tell you too much more because that will ruin it. So just trust me on this. If you're a big fan of Tchikovsky, or if you want to give him a chance, novellas are really easy to read and a really easy way to decide if you like what he has to offer. Another author in this area is Becky Chambers. She, I think, really shines when we're talking about novellas. The first novella is definitely a standalone. It's called To Be Fortunate If Taught, which I realize is a really strange title, but it very much makes sense at the end. This novella is really what converted me into being a Becky Chambers fan. It follows 4 astronauts who are charged with exploring the universe, particularly 4 specific planets that could be housing human life or sentient life. Their job is to go to these planets and determine whether we could send colonies to the planets or not. In such a small amount of space, these 4 astronauts go and hit all 4 worlds. Not only are each world very, very cool, very, very interesting, but the ending was, in my opinion, one of the best endings of her career. I was very impressed with this novella. I actually recommend this novella for people who are wanting to get into sci-fi but don't know if they like it, because I think this novella really encompasses a lot of what sci-fi is really about, and I loved the ending. This is probably my maybe number 1 or number 2 novella of this whole list that I enjoyed the most. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Becky Chambers also wrote a book called A Psalm for the Wild Belt. This one is one of her most recents, and to warn you, there is a second in the series that comes out this year. This one was a little bit more typical of what she writes. It's a very cozy read. It takes place around a monk in the future who's trying to figure out what he wants to do in his life, what his purpose is. Among his ramblings, he also encounters a friendly robot who wants to find their place in the world. So this book was just like a warm, fuzzy read. There was almost like a little bit of a good moral to the ending of the story, maybe like a little bit self-helpy, a little bit dealing with just like a comfort read. Not a whole lot of action, but it is something that I would recommend everybody read to get the moral of the story, if you will. So I liked Becky Chambers. I really love her writing style. There's just something so cozy about it. But these 2 novellas are definitely very different. The next and final author that I wanted to mention is Ursula Le Guinn. This is a little bit more in terms of like classic sci-fi, kind of like Robert Heinlein. Ursula Le Guinn is really well known for her politics and for challenging things that hadn't been challenged before. One of her most famous novellas is called The Word for World is Forest. Again, kind of a complicated title, but again, sort of makes sense at the end. This one is also akin to either Fern Gully or Avatar. It's taking place on an alien world where humanity has already encountered a very peaceful alien species which they have enslaved. This novella is very dark. It is not for kids. It was very anti-militaristic. It was a very much what-if speculative fiction, very much warning. This book was written as her response to what was happening in the Vietnam War at the time. Definitely an interesting idea that she put forth, but very, very, very dark, very heavy. If you're interested in maybe more of a lighthearted book and you're not a huge stickler for the word count of novellas, a book that she wrote that was only 48,000 words, right? 8,000 over, The Lathe of Heaven. This book follows a psychiatrist who one of her clients believes is having dreams that get to predict or control the future and maybe actually do. So there's no space, there's no big space battles, there's no future technology, but it's just a really interesting what-if idea. So if you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted from Ursula, that's where I would go. I really want to mention, if you're interested in sci-fi novellas, there aren't a lot of places to look for where to find them. So I wanted to include a couple of options for you. The first place to go look for a novella is on the Hugo and Nebula award-winning websites. Remember that they have a whole category for novellas only, and on top of that, they have tons of nominees who may not have won, but they were good enough to be nominated. That's definitely a good place to go check out. Another awesome place to go check for novellas is Tor.com. They often have novellas that you can download for free, or you can order in large packs for a really cheap price. So if you're interested in reading more novellas, those are the two places I would go check. And that does it for my top 10 list. However, I want to cover two other topics really quickly, and that is, if you're in it for a novella, I haven't read any of her stuff yet, but the queen of novellas, sci-fi novellas specifically, according to the Hugo Awards, is Connie Willis. Connie Willis has the record for the most number of novella nominations from the Hugo and Nebula Awards, and she has the most number of winning novellas. Now, one of her most famous is actually a book that is on my TBR currently called Inside Job, and it's supposed to be a parody of a lot of like seances and kind of dealing with, are they real? Very, very new agey, if you will. But she has quite a few novellas. I just haven't read any, which is why I couldn't put her on my list. But I can't go through here without mentioning her to you. I will be doing a video in the future on fantasy novellas, so if you're interested in that, be sure to check out my channel, like, subscribe, help out a new booktuber. If you've read some of these, or if there are more that I should consider, please let me know down in the comments. Remember that these are only the novellas that I have read that I can recommend. Until next time.